Good afternoon, everyone. A very warm welcome to all of you for this afternoon's Quest Connect. I'm Petrea, for those who may be new to our Facebook page, and a very warm welcome to everyone, whether you're regular viewers of Quest Connect or joining us for the first time. Given that it's Mother's Day next weekend, I thought it might be good to talk about mothers. But first I'd like to acknowledge that I'm coming to you from Gundungurra country in the Southern Highlands of New South Wales, and just to take a moment to pay our respects to the elders and the emerging leaders and the present leaders who have walked this land for millennia and who've always known how to live in harmony with this land. So why don't we start off just by coming to our senses. For those of you who may be new to this practice, it's useful to remember that our bodies are always in the present moment. The only place actually that we can experience happiness is in the present moment. You can't be happy in 5 minutes or 5 minutes ago. You need to be here now. And one of the most effective ways of bringing the brain to rest, because it has a tendency to always be projecting things into the future, our worries, our fears, our concerns, into what might happen, could happen, probably won't happen. Or the brain is telling us stories about the past where we regret, we blame, we shame, we rewrite history, and we chew over things from the past that haven't yet come to rest. However, our body's always here in the present moment. And for those of us who live with chronic pain, I know that the body is often not a place that we like to be. However, our ability to be present really involves connecting the whole of us, which includes the body, into the present moment. So we'll just take a moment. You can leave your eyes open or closed, and we'll have another little practice towards the end of our hour together. So there's no need to change your posture. There's nothing that you need do. It's just about being fully present where you are in this moment. And we best do that by connecting with the senses of our body, because our senses are always feeding information in to our awareness. But we so often miss it because we're not present. So whether you're sitting or lying down, just be aware of your body as it is, its posture, the shape, the weight of your body. Notice what's supporting your body. Perhaps a chair or a mattress, the floor. Notice where your body touches those points that are supporting you. Perhaps your sit bones, and aware of the touch of your clothing against your skin, its texture, where your clothing moves against your skin as you breathe. Aware of the rising and falling of your belly. And noticing where your clothing is firmer, is looser against your skin as you breathe. Aware of the quality of the air as it flows in and out of your body. Perhaps you're breathing in more through one nostril than the other. Aware of the difference in temperature between the inward and outward breath as the air is warmed by your body. Aware of any taste in your mouth. Perhaps notice how your tongue, your nose work in concert to establish taste. Aware of any aroma in the air. and aware of how your nostrils savour the air to extract the aroma. Notice what falls within your gaze or any sight behind closed eyes. Aware of all of the sounds around you, both close by, and let your listening run right out till you hear the clouds passing. And the breath, the sensations of the inward and outward breath. The rising and falling of your belly. The sensations in your nostrils as the air enters and leaves your body. Savouring this precious moment in time as it is, as you are, together. Thank you. It's always good to fully arrive. And I'd so encourage you to practice that throughout every waking moment in your day. It's a really effective way of training your brain to be focused in the present moment. So, let's talk a bit about mums. They've had such an influence on our lives, for better or worse. And so I want to talk about the consequences of our mothering. The mothering that we received rather than the mothering that we gave, although we may reflect on that too. Obviously, we've had the closest of relationships with our mother because as babies we grew inside of our mother. And in the last trimester of her pregnancy, we picked up all of the neurotransmitters of her emotions. And this is in a way to prepare the baby to come into the world of the mother. So obviously it's an unconscious adaptation. We just take on the emotional chemistry of our mother in the last trimester of her pregnancy. And that's to prepare us to come into the world in which she lives. If it was a war-torn world, you may very well have had more receptors to anxiety and fear and being on guard. If your mother was emotionally depressed, if she was grieving, all of this has an influence because it kind of sets you up to enter the world of your mother. In the best of all possible worlds, we all had a natural birth, and that's where we got our microbiome. So, as we passed down through our mother's birth canal as we were born, something none of us want to reflect on for too long, our jaw was pushed back and we took in all of the juices of the birth canal of our mother. And this was the beginning, the seeding of our microbiome, which is all of that wonderful bacteria that we have in our gut. We know that next to the brain, the gut secretes the most neurotransmitters, which is the chemistry of your emotions. So we first pick up that microbiome because the womb is a sterile environment. But as we come down the birth canal, and then as we get the first few days of milk from our mother, the colostrum from our mother, that's full of bacteria as well that further seed the microbiome, the bowel of the baby. We know that babies born via cesarean missed out on that. And certainly in some enlightened hospitals now, they literally take those same juices and massage them over the baby, in the nose, in the mouth, in the ears, in the eyes, in all of the orifices, because this literally puts the bacterial population into the baby, which is what's meant to happen. And then we set off on that journey, and in the best of all possible worlds, our mother bonds with us immediately, which often takes some time. And we used to think babies couldn't see when they were born, but now we know that their eyes are absolutely focused to go from the crook of the mother's arm to the pupil of the mother's eye. And what the baby's looking for is a dilated pupil, because when we're in love, our pupils dilate. And the baby sees a dilated pupil, and it sends off these cascades of neurotransmitters in the brain that help to grow the connections. And so all of this is obviously happening unconsciously to us. Babies are in the present moment, but they don't know that they are. So they're just that blinking consciousness looking out at the world. And in the best of all possible worlds, we're placed into arms that lovingly and securely hold us because we're wanted. And we feel safe, we feel loved, we feel wanted, we feel cared for. And all of that is a cascade of neurotransmitters that flood out of the brain and ultimately out of the gut to every cell of the body, and on the surface of every cell it's covered in receptor sites. And this information about how we feel, not how we think, how we feel, is wired into the cell, moment by moment. We are feeling beings long, long, long before we're thinking beings. So we're just taking on the world around us. Then we don't really even know we're in a body when we first get here. We like being all wrapped up because that's how we've been inside of mum. If you leave a newborn to struggle with all of its arms and legs going about, which is a lovely thing for it to do, of course, it doesn't yet know what all of this means because all that wiring hasn't happened. Only 15% of the brain is wired up for action when we get here. And that's only around reflexes of how to seek for food, how to suckle, loud noises, being dropped. These simple bodily processes that we have when we're born. But all the rest we take on. So we were that kind of pure consciousness looking out at the world, and we're gradually taking on how we're relating to people in our world. And hopefully, in the best of all possible worlds, everyone looks at you with love, radiates love towards you. When we're hungry, we get fed. When we're soiled, we get changed. When we're hot, we get cooled down, and vice versa. So up until now, we've had womb service. But now we're in the outside world, all of our needs are effortlessly met. And we feel loved. We feel, in time, an increasing source of joy in our family. Then about 8, 10, 12 weeks, babies begin to find that they've got a body. And it's often the hands they see first. And it's like, whoa, way to go, look at this. And then they realise, I've got this whole body, I've got to get up and happening. I've got to learn to roll over, to sit up, to stand. It's not like the baby stands up once and sits down and says, well, that's it, I won't try again. We keep this relentless moving forward all the time, supported and encouraged, hopefully, by those around us, particularly our mum. And so when we achieve any of these milestones of sitting, of rolling over, of standing up, everybody cheers and claps like you're the first person on the planet ever to have achieved that. And what we drink in through our eyes and our ears and our tactile senses are the feelings, the neurotransmitters of, I'm just drop dead gorgeous. I don't need to do anything. I'm lovable, I'm loved, I'm loving. And then, even in the best of all possible worlds, some other things begin to happen. We're surrounded by our family's I'll be happy when story. We hear I'll be happy when the mortgage is paid off, I'll be happy when we buy the house, I'll be happy when we get a better car, go on holidays, pay off our debts. And before long, we just unconsciously take on this pattern of believing. I'll be happy when I have my birthday, when Christmas comes, when I turn 5, when I go to school, when I leave school, when I find my perfect partner, get married, get divorced. It's very deeply programmed in us at a very early age because we hear that from our parents around us. And we're only talking about in the best of all possible worlds. I'll talk about the other world where your mum may have had other struggles going on in her life when you were born. But in this perfect scenario, we're still taking on the I'll be happy when story, and we learn to postpone our happiness to another time when things look different from how they are now. We also are taking on unconsciously the prejudices that our family holds. And these are the prejudices about the others, people who are a bit different from us, different because of religion or ethnicity, culture, socioeconomic background, education, success or lack of it. And so there's us who are like this, and there's them who are like that. In some households that's very strong, and certainly in some households you wouldn't imagine marrying outside of your culture or your religion, or your wealth, or your lack of it. But as babies, we're just taking this on unconsciously. Prejudices, judgments about other people. And then, of course, the other thing we're taking on is the way into our family. Maybe we get feedback, positive feedback, by being the pretty one, or the bright one, or the funny one, or the black sheep, or the musical one, the peacemaker, the responsible one. And so we practice a particular persona that works within the dynamics of our family. And a lot of that is our relationship with our mother, who's our primary, often, caregiver. She's grown us, she's fed us, she's nurtured us into being. For those that didn't have that kind of mothering, and so even when we've had the best mothering, we've still taken on the I'll be happy when story, we've taken on the family dynamics and practiced a persona that works within that dynamic. We've taken on the judgments that they hold, and then we go to school and we take on other judgments, maybe from our peers. But for the person who was born to the mother who was depressed or an alcoholic or didn't want you, the neurochemistry that went in can be very different. So instead of that repetitive plugging into the cell, the dynamic of I'm loved, I'm lovable, I'm loving, you may very well have plugged in different kinds of feelings. There's no space for me. I'm not wanted. I'm unlovable. And of course, for those who were separated from their mother at birth or very near to birth, regardless of the loving family that baby may have been given into and grew up in, they absolutely know that they've been severed from the mother in which they grew, because we've taken on her emotional world. We've taken on her microbiome. We've taken on so much of her. And for those who were adopted out, I know it can be a lifelong sense of abandonment. So whether we have a happy childhood or a childhood in which we grew up maybe in violence, maybe in unexpected things happening all the time, so there was no sense of safety, no sense of security, then what was being plugged into the cell at that epigenetic level was very, very different than someone who grew up in a loving, supportive, nurturing household. And most of that programming has actually gone in by the time we're 3, before we've even got language to articulate any of it. It hasn't gone in as a conscious understanding. It's gone in as biochemistry wired into our cells, literally. And it's second nature for us to feel a particular way. And that's because of that relationship that we have with that mother figure. Also, in the first 7 years, we know that the brain of a child is actually in a hypnotic state. It's why children are able to turn a broomstick into a horse, a saucepan into a drum, because the world of the imagination, the world of possibility, the world of being totally open to what is so keenly aware in young children. It's why the Jesuits say, give me a child until he's 7, I'll show you the man. Because they knew that if you got a child in that first 7 years, when all of this information is being wired into the cells of the being, then you could show the person that this would become, because it's all been wired in those early years. So, if we didn't attach to our mum very well, and that may have been circumstantial, maybe she was preoccupied with something else, maybe she had a million things on her plate besides us, and maybe we were an afterthought or an inconvenience. Babies are very, very sensitive to atmosphere, because that's all they've got. All their senses are reading the environment that they're in so that they can adjust and survive and hopefully thrive in that environment. So most of that, as I said, has gone in by 3, but is well established by the time we're 7, which is when the brain begins to change for a child, so that they have access to beta and alpha, rather than being in that delta theta state where the brain is quite open to taking on information. So if you say to a young child, you're hopeless, you're useless, you're a nuisance, you're not wanted, no one loves you, these things can be incredibly wounding for young children, because they don't know what's real. And whereas it might have been said through shortness of temper, for the child, that's vital information. I remember overhearing 2 teachers talking about, well, I felt they were talking about me. I think they were, because I was very, very tiny for my age. And I overheard these 2 teachers saying, oh, you know the one, that mousy-haired, sickly-looking child. Oh boy, do I remember that went in like a dagger, because I thought that's how people see me, that mousy-haired, sickly-looking child. I wanted to disappear. I wanted the earth to open up and swallow me whole. So that was at 12. Maybe I'm a slow learner. But this information that comes in, we then start looking to have verification that what we have begun to take on as our reality from our mother, how she relates to us, and then ultimately how our family relates to us. We take all of that on, and then we are looking for verification in the world for what we're taking on is actually true. Because, you know, at 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, we don't have the awareness to say, oh, isn't that interesting? I feel confused. We just feel confused. But we don't know what the feeling is, or we just feel sad, or we just feel grief, or we feel whatever it is. But we don't have a language yet to even know what those feelings are. And most of us surely did not grow up in emotionally literate households in which our mothers, let alone our fathers, helped us to understand what it was that we were feeling and to give expression to that it's okay to express that in ways that don't wound yourself or other people or furniture. Most of us didn't grow up in that household. If you did, major blessing. I think so often we look to our parents as meant to be some perfect version, because after all, they are our parents. And I think the day comes for all of us when we realise that, of course, they are only human beings doing the best they know how, given who they are, what happened to them, and what they made of that. And once we recognise that, then we can more easily have compassion and understanding that everyone actually is doing the best they know how, given who they are, what happened to them, and what they made of it. And some people, like us, stay a victim of whatever happened to them for the rest of time. Some of us, because of whatever suffering might have happened in our life, wake up at some stage, mostly through suffering, but sometimes through inspiration, where we begin to wake up to the fact that we have choice and that we don't have to be a helpless victim of our upbringing, of our relationship with our mother, with our father, with our siblings, that we don't have to be so buffeted, so wounded by their behaviour, by their words, because we recognise that they are people on their own journey doing the best they know how, given who they are and what happened to them and what they made of it. That's why when I was 33 and when I had leukemia, and my parents were looking after me, I moved in with my parents. My children had to go and live with their father, which gave me no joy. And now my mother was washing me and drying me and getting me back to bed. And I was trying so hard to be grateful for the love and care that she was giving to me, and yet I was used to washing and drying my own children and found my dependence as an adult was very challenging. And yet my mum is the most remarkable woman who's had more heartache in her life than most, having lost a brother, a son, and certainly ultimately her husband, which was a relief. So the mother relationship, when we get to that place where we recognise that they are doing the best they know how, I decided at that point that I would call them by their names, Ray and Jeff, rather than Mum and Dad, because it helped me to recognise the journey that each of them had made in their own life growing up. And it helped me to have more compassion and more understanding and to let go the need for them to be any different from who they were. And we recognise that we all have imperfections, and we can wound one another with those imperfections for as long as we want. But a wise teacher once said, are you going to hang on to that unforgiving relationship that you have with your mum, maybe, until your death? Are you going to hang on to the resentment, all the things you didn't get, all of the things that you did get, all of the things that you missed out on, all of the things that you got that you didn't want, whatever it was? Are you going to hang on to it and take it with you to the grave? Or will you give it up the week before? Or maybe at the end of this year? or just maybe give it up. Because why would you postpone the happiness that comes from accepting people as they are? Doesn't mean you keep putting yourself in the firing line, but you can accept people as they are and let go the need for them to be any different from who they are. Because the only person you can change on the planet is yourself. So when we let go the need for our mother to be any different from who she is, then we can just love her for who she is. And I know, because we hear so many stories in our residential programs at Quest of people who have very painful relationships with their mum. It doesn't mean when you forgive that you keep putting yourself in the firing line. I know there are some very toxic people out there, and they have children. And so it doesn't mean that we just keep lying down and get walked over and over again, or attacked over and over again. We can love them, and we may choose how long we spend with them, where we might spend that time with that person, whether we're going to be outdoors. You might not want to have your mother in your home if you feel that you've been invaded. You may not want to have visits in her home if you feel trapped, and that you go back into your little girl or little boy whenever you go into your mother's home. So it's be mindful of that relationship, but letting go the need for her to be any different from who she is liberating. Then you can just love her for who she is. And remember that wonderful mantra: no one does mum better than mum does. There's mum doing mum now. If I want mum to be any different from who mum is, I'm going to suffer. There's mum doing mum now. That can be very useful to remember as a reminder when we get triggered by something that she says she does, and we find that old pattern that we have from long, long ago surfaces yet again. And we can recognise the pattern and choose not to say the words, not to react from that past wound, because now that wound has healed and we have a story, but we're not living in the story. Now, of course, that takes awareness and it takes work. Our reactions are very much laid down in our bodies, and it's second nature to us to react. But I don't know about you, I sure got to a place where I no longer wanted to keep seeing the flaws in my parents and just see them as people who were on their own ancient journey through life, making of it what they will. And that whilst they had given us life, what we do with that life, whilst it may have been influenced very strongly by our mother, does not mean that we are trapped in the patterns that we developed because of our mum. Some of us have taken on patterns that are so unconscious. You know, like you make your bed, you lie in it. That's one that's got me into trouble a few times. To this day, one of the ones from my mum that actually is terrifically useful is don't put it down, put it away. And it's funny when these sayings of our mum keep echoing to us as we indeed become mothers ourselves and indeed grandmothers. And when you live long enough to see that some of these patterns that we take on were very much influenced by the upbringing that we received, whether it was great or not. The great blessing happens when we wake up at some stage in our life to recognise that we are not a helpless victim of our history, that we can make new choices, we can be master of our own destiny, we can live the life we came here to live, and liberate ourselves from the patterns that we all have adopted because of our upbringing, whether we had wonderful mothering or appalling mothering or no mothering at all. Now, for those who had no mothering at all, it's very challenging. And of course it depends on our previous history, and who knows how long that history might be. Perhaps we have one life, but many bodies. And so maybe we've taken on a long period of learning before we even get here to this lifetime. We're very, very, very rarely born into the family of our spirit. If you are, major blessing. And sometimes the family you were born into doesn't start off as the family of your spirit, but often through suffering that is shared suffering in the family, we become the family of our spirit. But for many of us, we were not born into the family of our spirit. And the people that we rub up against, our family members, help us to discover who we are and what we value. A little bit like the pearl only comes about in the oyster because something irritated the heck out of the oyster. And of course then, remember too, don't put your pearls before swine. Only share your tender, vulnerable bits with people who will absolutely respect them, will never trivialise them, will never use them as a weapon against you at a later time. Only share those tender vulnerabilities of your own awakening to possibility with people who will absolutely honour and respect them. So your family of your blood may be your pearl makers, the people you rub up against in order to discover who you are and what you value. And if you're very fortunate, the family of your blood can become the family of your spirit. It certainly happened in our family, but it's taken a good deal of suffering to help us to break down some of the strictures that we all developed growing up together, the ways of being around each other. I'm so blessed to still have my mum. She's 100 this year. So our relationship has certainly developed into absolutely the family of my spirit. And what a blessing that is. But I know it's not that for everyone. And the lack of mothering that some people have experienced has echoed as an aching void throughout that person's life. Until we recognise that we may need to know how to mother ourselves, how to parent that part of ourselves that was never parented well. How we're going to love and nurture that part of ourselves. I wonder if you, like me, found that when you began that inner discovery, you actually had quite a harsh relationship to that inner child within yourself. One where you were constantly criticising or loathing or beating up that fragile part of yourself that felt so unlovable and unloved. And when we heal that within ourselves and recognize that everybody's on their same journey in life, this experience of being human, which is an extraordinary experience. I know the Hindus say to have a human life is a rarity and a great blessing, because consciousness can show up in so many ways on the planet. And when it shows up in human form, us, then we have the chance to liberate ourselves from whatever was the beginnings of our life and what we made of it, so that we actually become fully alive and make the contribution that you came here to make, that can only be made by you. And that's really a willingness to let go all of the stories that we tell ourselves about our mothering, the mothering that we received, and perhaps the mothering that we've given as well, where we've fallen short ourselves. And perhaps we've had those conversations with our own children of, I'm sorry I wasn't the perfect mum. I was doing the best I knew how, given who I was, what had happened to me and what I'd made of it. But there were many things I could have done a whole lot better. And of course then we discover the liberation of being a grandparent, where we no longer have to focus so much on the behaviour of the child in that developing and nurturing and pruning kind of way, but in celebration of that child and their interests, and give them our time. So I wonder what kind of mothering that you received and what impact it had on your life, and whether you feel that it strengthened you to be able to embrace whatever challenges came your way, or whether you felt quite ill-equipped. I know for some people, and we've had many of these people on our programs too, they had blissful childhoods. They were much loved. They were much wanted. They were celebrated. They were acknowledged. They had a terrific childhood full of love and fun. But when the first disappointment came along in their life, it knocked them for six, because nothing had ever gone wrong. And they didn't have a clue how to embrace this particular disappointment. And for those who had very poor mothering may discover, actually it made you really self-reliant. It made you an independent person. Maybe it gave you quite a lot of self-belief. Or maybe you picked up a whole bunch of patterns of, I do it myself. My value lies in what I do, not who I be. Or my value lies in how things look. And of course we've got to keep things looking really schmick all the time to convince ourselves and perhaps everyone else that everything's okay because it appears to be okay. So a lot of these patterns that we take on are so unconscious. And we live them out in our life unconsciously until we wake up to the game, really, of what we're doing. So whether we had challenging childhoods that actually gave us a lot of resilience and a lot of self-belief, or grit and determination, or whether we grew up loved and nurtured and cared for, if the purpose of human existence is to wake up and be in service to life, whether we have blissful childhoods or very challenging ones, the work is the same. And at some stage for most of us, we bump into that D in life, whatever it is. The disappointment, the drama, the disaster, the diagnosis, the death, the divorce, the despair, the depression, the drought, the downpour, the debt, the dad, the daughter, whatever the D is, that everything that's second nature to us doesn't work. And we have the opportunity to make that return journey back home to our essential nature. So we can all embark on that journey back home to our essential nature. And perhaps that's the purpose of human existence. And if so, then the mothering that we received was the mothering that was perfect for us, and that the children we give birth to, we're the perfect mum for them and for whatever they are here to accomplish. So sometimes if we take that lens, we can realise that nothing wrong is happening, even when things seem to be falling through our fingers, and we're driven to the present moment as our only refuge, because that's how it can be. We're driven to the present moment as our only refuge, because it's only in the present moment that we find happiness, that we find peace, that we find connection, that we find that inner equilibrium within ourselves from which we can respond to whatever life's challenges are without wanting it to be any different from how it is, from not wanting anyone to be any different from who they are on a good day. That's where we want to aim for, because that's where that inner sense of peace, that equilibrium within ourselves can be found. And that's what we're all yearning for. So next week, when you perhaps celebrate your mum, you could remind her of some of the gifts that you've received from living with her, whether they're challenging, through challenges that you had together or with her. Or I know for some that conversation would be impossible. And sometimes we can write it better than we can speak it. And so maybe it might be worth even considering writing one of those I notice, I imagine, I feel kind of letters to your own mum. I notice, as if you and your mother stand hand in hand and you're reflecting on, yes, I notice that this is what happened between us. I imagine is, I wonder what your perspective of that might have been. And I feel lets her know how you felt about whatever that situation was, rather than you're the problem or I'm the problem. So we use that formula of I notice. You can use I've been reflecting on, I've been thinking about. You don't have to use the exact words, but it's as if you stand hand in hand, and I notice that this is what's gone on between us. And I imagine as I'm trying to understand what your perspective of that might be. And this is how I feel about what went on. And sometimes there's a fourth step of, and I need to tell you that I love you. With all our differences, with all of our struggles, I love you. I remember the first time, because our family was not the kind that ever said I love you. We assumed we loved each other. We gave kisses on the cheek that missed, but we assumed we all loved each other. And it wasn't until I was really sick and dying of leukemia, and I remember going into the kitchen and my father was in there, and I gave him a hug from behind because a full frontal would have been totally impossible. And I said to him, and I nearly choked on the words, "I love you." And he turned around and with tears in his eyes, he said, "I've been a bastard of a father." And I said, "Yeah, and I love you." And we embraced, and everything that had gone before was swept clean in that moment. Just a moment of forgiveness, of acceptance, that regardless of all the past, and there'd been some, there'd been quite some, it all just melted in that moment of "I love you," and a willingness just to love and overlook everything that had happened before and let it go. Even though we let these things go doesn't mean that the consequences, which are unconscious, are still within us and still require bringing them to awareness and choosing again and again and again and again not to react from those past beliefs that we adopted because of the parenting that we had. So just some thoughts about mothering. I hope you can hear the crimson rosellas outside, and we had the odd cockatoo go through as well. So we might just close with a short practice. And remember, with these practices, you're not trying to do anything. It's really about not doing. It's more about just being as you are and savouring the moment. It's the only place where happiness is found. And we can stay constantly connected to the present moment by a willingness to be fully embodied. And if we're taking in the sights and sounds and smells, the tastes, the sensations of this moment constantly, the brain quietens down. And then, of course, when the brain is quiet, we have access to those terrific qualities, the qualities of your first nature: insight, intuition, wisdom, humour, spontaneity, creativity, compassion. Those are the qualities of your first nature. When we relinquish everything that's become second nature to us, that's home. That's the kingdom of heaven that's within us. And that's what meditation connects us to. So please join me any Monday evening on the Petrea King meditation group, where we get together every Monday evening, well, most of them, unless I've got a board meeting, for a little bit of a chat and a practice together. So feel free to join us any Monday evening there. Let's just take a moment to come to our senses as we close this afternoon. So bring your awareness once more to your physical body and its posture, just as it is. Aware of the weight of your body and what's supporting your body, the touch points, your sit bones, if you're sitting. Feel the touch of your clothing against your skin, aware of its looseness, its firmness, its movement against your skin as you breathe. Aware of all the sounds in the immediate space around you. Then in the distant space, right out until you hear the sun shining above the clouds. Aware of the sounds, without resistance or judgment. And there's no need to even label them. Just savouring each moment. And the breath, this one breath we share. The rising and falling of your belly. The movement of your clothing against your skin as you breathe. You might like to imagine that you're under one end of a rainbow. As if a rainbow comes down through the ceiling, surrounds and envelops you, passes through you into Mother Earth. And breathe in the colours of the rainbow. That soft, iridescent mist of light. The colours of hope. The colours of love. The colours of peace, of promise. Imagine them gathering in your heart. Bless them with your love. And extend the other end of the rainbow from you to your mother. And see her bathed in the light and peace of the rainbow. Whether she's alive or gone, just allow an image in your mind's eye and see her filled with the light and peace of the rainbow. Extend your love and blessings like fairy dust across the rainbow to her, for giving you life, for giving you whatever she was able to give you. To see her filled with peace. Thank you everyone for joining me this afternoon. I wish you well, and I wish you peace next Sunday as you either reminisce about your own mum, if she's no longer here, that maybe you take a moment to acknowledge her life, her struggles, what she made of them, and what she became because of those. Perhaps light her a candle, perhaps send her a rainbow. And for those of you who have your mother, whether it's a fractious relationship or a loving one, I wish you peace next Sunday. And I look forward to when our paths cross again, perhaps tomorrow evening, 7:30 for meditation on the Petrea King meditation group page. I look forward to seeing you then. Bye for now.